I'm Shannon.
And I'm Mark.
And this is Dirt Sailor, the podcast. Happy Throat Punch Thursday.
Well, happy Throat Punch Thursday.
How are you doing on this hot, sweaty day?
All the above.
We had our rise up to summer, and it is here.
It's California. Only 2 seasons. Hot and cold.
Yes. We have about 3 weeks where we cool off massively and 3 weeks where we increase rapidly. We don't get a bunch of days in the 70s and 80s. We seem to go from the 60s, a 3-week quick climb into the 90s and beyond. And our cool off is the same, just lightning fast.
Yes.
Do you ever wish you lived somewhere with 4 distinct seasons?
No. I like my 2 seasons.
You like your 2 seasons?
Yes.
Burning hot and freezing cold?
Taxes and no taxes.
Those are the 2 seasons, aren't they? Taxing season and other taxing season.
Yes, and it'll be interesting to see if, since this report has just come out about our president and his family, if they ever pay taxes on all their millions and millions and millions that they've made for basically not having a job.
Are you talking about the 20-plus shell corporations that nobody actually knows what the corporations do because they're just a shell? They just pass through each corporation, busting down however much money was made on whatever alignment project or meeting project and going through all of the different Bidens.
Passing on Biden to Biden to Biden.
Got to keep it in the family.
Yes, well, and apparently it's not unusual. Did a little bit of reading today on LLCs, limited liability companies. And according to the powers to be, because it's not me, I'm not a powers to be, the U.S. is one of the largest havens for money laundering and tax evasion through LLCs. This is a United Nations report and confirmed by the Treasury Department. It's an estimated $300 billion in illicit proceeds flow through U.S. financial institutions.
Oh, that's just a little bit of Ukraine money.
And it's funny you say that because Ukraine was one of the countries mentioned.
Really now?
Yes.
You don't say. I guess you did say.
Well, where's our president from?
The great state of Delaware.
Delaware.
Except he was born in Pennsylvania, unless you listen to his last story where he was born wherever his grandfather died, which wasn't Pennsylvania.
He was born where he was born.
Yes, but he was born in Pennsylvania. However, he was the senator and representative from Delaware. And that's where his current beach home is in Delaware. He goes there just about every weekend.
The reason I mentioned Delaware is because when one of these reports was released in 2010, I know it's 2023, but you could start an LLC for $90.
So Delaware is one of the biggest places to start an LLC because of the lack of disclosures that are required there. And when I worked for immigration, a lot of the businesses that were attempting to get people over to the United States as foreign workers were incorporated in Delaware.
Yes. It's interesting you mentioned Border Patrol, Delaware, immigration, because just not too long ago, 6 executives were charged in a $500 million offshore securities fraud and money laundering scheme, according to U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement.
No way. Never happened.
Way.
Who done it? Did they say who done it?
Well, they left us with a sense of what countries they were from. Because one country Robert Bainfield was from was the U.S. Andrew Godfrey was from Belize. Kelvin Leach and Robin Knowles were citizens of the Bahamas. Brian Witt and Kim Can were citizens of Canada. So they kind of spread their wealth and their expertise in thievery around the world.
Yeah, well, the Biden crime family, for some of the business that they've done, they've received over $10 million from business schemes out of Romania and China. And it's influence peddling. It's not really a job, as you said, a non-job for the powers that be, but the non-job, the influence peddling, apparently at least 10 members and business associates created a web of 20 companies in order, some of which were formed during Joe Biden's vice presidency. So this whole thing that he was out of office is not truthful. But they formed these businesses or LLCs and then started funneling over $10 million from foreign companies through these LLCs. One is Romania. And there were some transactions that happened between November 2015 and May 2017 in which one LLC was paid over $3 million.
And he always tries to cover his tracks because as recently as March 2nd of 2023, President Biden has proposed a sweeping pandemic anti-fraud proposal going after systematic fraud and taking on identity theft and helping victims. So this is what narcissists and other types do.
So let's talk about assisting in identity fraud and helping the victims of said identity fraud, going after pandemic fraud, etc. So this is coming from the same person who was previously vice president, and he was vice president under Obama, who implemented a program, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which was taking a carve out in our immigration law system and essentially, my opinion, abusing it to where he could get a bunch of people work permits and authorize them to stay in the hopes that eventually they would get status here, that Congress would feel strong-armed, my opinion, into doing what he ultimately wanted, which was to give a bunch of people unlawfully present lawful resident status, the eventual outcome. So, how does this relate? Well, during the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, they had to submit records that they were here in the United States and that they were here before the age of 16. Because it was for childhood arrivals, and it was that they were unlawfully brought, had nothing to do with them, that they could not have said no because a parent or guardian brought them here. Part of the proof that people would submit was the use of taxpayer social security numbers that did not belong to them, and a claim that they were working at a particular job because they had to arrive before the age of 16, but then they had to have been here for 5 years post arrival. So they would say, hey, I'm 21 now. I arrived here the day before my 16th birthday. I've worked a job, but I had to do it under somebody else's social security number, and this is the one that I used. Well, that's identity theft. And when it was brought up that they were using fraudulent identities in order to work, regardless of whether or not you think they should be able to or shouldn't be able to, they would indicate that they did or didn't file taxes on this money. They took somebody else's ID. They worked under somebody else's social security number. And in fact, people would get targeted by the IRS for non-payment of taxes or statements that they worked 2 jobs and they only paid taxes on one of them, and the truth was their identity was stolen. There are many claims over the years of this happening. So this at the time, vice president was totally good with people stealing identities because we weren't allowed to report on them to the IRS. We weren't allowed to take it outside of our house, outside of USCIS. Could not take that information out. But now we're going to do something about those people using the fraudulent IDs and stealing identities.
And you know full well he's not going to do anything about this. This guy is so fake, it's unreal. He doesn't even know probably what his last name is anymore. Any more than we are supposed to be silly enough to believe that he didn't know about all this money that was pushing through into his checking account. You don't set up 20 LLCs to transfer money from one crooked guy to an LLC and then transfer it from an LLC to another LLC and then transfer it to the granddaughter and the daughter and the daughters and the son and the son and the dad and on and on and on and on. These people are as corrupt as the day is long. We know it. You want to know how corrupt they are? Just look at our southern border currently. So that's how they're fixing everything now. They just opened the doors, threw away the keys, and now we have people rushing in by the hundreds of thousands, and it's going to create mayhem for years and years to come.
Right, and they want to just let people in without a court date, no notice to appear. No, right now we have a system, and I'm not saying that it's perfect, but court dates are years away. 2, 3, 4 years away from where they are now. So that just shows how broken our system is if we can't get people into a timely hearing. But it was broken by all of these policies, which are to encourage people to come to the border. Under Trump, they were encouraging people to not listen to Trump, not be deterred, and to come to the United States unlawfully. We have people like AOC who continue to call these individuals asylum seekers. Are there real asylum seekers? Yes, absolutely. But they make up about 1% of all the people who are coming to the United States unlawfully or without a visa, without a legal avenue to come. So she'll say over and over again, just to get it into people's heads and minds and hearts, that they're asylum seekers and we need to help them out. When the truth is, many of them are economic migrants who are likely to come here, work a job, and send the money back to their home country. Are there some that want to ultimately stay here? Yes, but many of the individuals are coming here to send money outside of here. They're not here for asylum. I'm not saying that they wouldn't want to make a better life. That is commendable. But that is not lawful. And we are a nation of laws. We do have a set of laws to follow, and encouraging people and then lying about their true nature, which is economic migrant, call it what it is. You just get it into people's head that the evil MAGA Republicans are out to stop those asylum seekers who are just running from crime in their country. The truth is that's a lie. So the truth is they're lying.
Well, it's apparent that they're liars, and it's apparent we are a nation of laws dependent on who you are. And something that's recently come out is the Durham report, and through his few years of investigation, they've realized that our FBI is crooked. Our DOJ is corrupt, and maybe not like they say, the field officers. The leadership, the appointed ones, are definitely corrupt, and their mindset skews towards one party over the other.
Yes, and they received an intelligence report that there was Trump-Russia collusion. But when you dove into what they received, the information didn't track, and they knew it right away. But instead of calling it, saying that it was a political hit job, instead, they decided to use and abuse their power and continue an investigation that never should have been continued. Now, one of the individuals that ultimately, I believe, pled guilty was Manafort. Now, they were going after Manafort for years, well before Trump-Russia collusion, well before that even existed, well before Manafort attached himself to the Trump team. Our government was looking into Manafort. The Trump-Russia collusion scheme assisted them in ultimately getting to Manafort. However, that was a gross abuse of their power. He should have gotten in trouble. He should have been investigated, and they should have been able to get to him, but not in the manner that they did, which was through an unlawful scheme hatched by the DNC and Hillary Clinton especially, or specifically Hillary Clinton, and all of it was a political hit.
Yes, it was definitely a political hit. I agree with you 100%. And I believe that Manafort was charged with not being registered as a foreign agent.
Right. He was doing the bidding when he wasn't allowed to. And this was, again, like 5-6 years before he met Trump. They were already investigating, if I remember my timeline correctly.
Doing the exact same things.
That Hunter Biden has been doing for
Probably
years.
Probably around the same exact time that Hunter Biden was doing it. So it's okay to collect monies.
Oh, wasn't Manafort Ukraine?
Yes.
So then Biden would have known about it through his son, who was also scheming with Ukraine. And wasn't there a prosecutor that was fired?
100%.
Oh, I wonder if all of that connects up. I'm going to have to go back to my connect the dot chart and see.
Yes. And I love the verbiage that Durham and these experts use when they come up with their conclusions. And one of Durham's conclusions was that senior FBI personnel displayed a serious lack of analytical rigor towards the information that they received, especially information received from politically affiliated persons and entities, which is exactly what you just eloquently explained, is that the DNC and Hillary were putting out propaganda that was just simply not true.
You know their problem. They didn't include Biden in on the review of all of this information because, Howard University just gave him an honorary doctorate in part to his sound analytical intellect and open embrace for all, popularity on both sides of the United States, and his illustrious reputation and outstanding service of 36 years. But more specifically, his sound analytical intellect. If the FBI just would have let it go top to bottom with Biden, he would have been able to help them out there.
Well, absolutely. That would have been great leadership by the Biden.
Okay, obviously a lot of sarcasm in there, but yes, Joe Biden just received an honorary doctorate for his sound analytical intellect. So we have definitely a problem when we call somebody who is unfortunately at his age in drastic decline, in steep decline. We call him a sound analytical intellect, but then our leaders in the FBI allow intellect to go by the wayside in order to scheme with other politically motivated individuals. We have a problem with what words mean.
Yes, that's why Durham has said the FBI needs to continue to do its work with the vigor, objectivity, and professionalism the American people deserve and rightly expect. That's why after his review of the whole situation in 2016 and 17 that happened, it is the sole reason the current FBI leadership has implemented dozens of corrective actions. Well, it's obvious that even though he feels they have implemented corrective actions, with the actions of the Bidens and what's going on with their illegal, well, I can't say it's really illegal because I don't know. I'm not an attorney, but I do have a simple mind, and I can.
What arguably should be illegal based on what we want for the United States and having our top leadership on the take of foreign countries and scheming with foreign countries, influence peddling with foreign countries, it should be illegal.
Yes, and that's what I was exactly going to say. Bingo, is they should not be allowed to do what they're doing to further their pocketbooks. They should not be allowed to generate incomes with no job, just simply using the influence of one of their parents, grandparents, kids to earn a very, very lucrative living. And I can tell you as a simple person that owns a small house, try not paying your property taxes. The IRS will come after you with their full force.
Right. You will have an issue with the federal government if you don't pay your federal income taxes. You will have an issue with the California State Franchise Tax Board, the arm of California for taxes, if you don't pay your California taxes. The city and county that you live in will come after you if you don't pay your property taxes. Forgo a year or 2 or 3 and see what happens. We've actually seen this happen across the United States, where cities and municipalities are selling people's homes for small tax liens. And then not only are they taking the money for the tax lien, then they're taking all of the rest of the profit on the house as a part of their, oh, well, we had to do work to get our money. You don't think that they will not only take everything they're due and then some? I implore you to look around the United States at the number of people that have lost everything because of a single tax bill, a single year of taxes they've gone after to the ends of the earth. They have razed houses because someone didn't appear to file a correct document to tell the city, hey, we're remodeling this house. It is not, dilapidated and sitting vacant. And the city can send it to the wrong address saying, hey, we're going to razz your house. And the person has no idea because the city sent it to the wrong address and their house gets knocked over and they filed all the correct paperwork. So even when you do the right thing, the city will still take everything that you have.
What? They make mistakes too?
Yeah, that happened out of Georgia. I don't know if you remember
recall.
that
Yes,
conversation. So they will do it whether you did it right or not. So don't think that you can not pay your taxes, because even when you do the right thing, you're subject to having everything taken by the government.
Correct. And that's why people look at all of this with such disdain, because they're tired of working so hard for a living just to see other people in politics and white-collar criminals get away with things year after year after year, time after time after time. They create policies, we pay. They say they're the fix, we pay. They're the ones that create all this. Just like our California governor, who feels like he needs to now raise taxes on corporations to take care of shortfalls.
Right. So we are seeing that California went from 3 years of having a surplus to now a massive deficit. And so just year over year, massive surplus, extreme deficit. And in fact, it's about $10 billion worse than originally projected. So what does the revised budget of Gavin Newsom say? Well, he wants to increase corporate taxes because the taxes that led to surpluses for 3 years isn't good enough, because now we're in a deficit year because they relied on rich people always making money. And when they don't make as much money, we get into this situation where we have a massive deficit. So in order to close that gap, he wants to cut funding, delay funding, borrow money, and then raise corporate taxes. He's also talking about possibly closing prisons. We already have seen a large increase of people who get sentenced to prison go straight out into the street. And that is because some of the non-violent crime, instead of going to prison because they were slated to be in jail for more than a year, so you go to prison, the non-violent criminals go to city jails. And in the city jails, when they're overcrowded, they get released. And so you can commit crimes that your sentencing will be multi-year sentencing, and you can end up getting out right away if you are in an overpopulated jail. So we still haven't fixed the person. We still haven't rehabilitated them, but we're seeing a cycle of conviction to release because of a lot of the laws that they've already had on the books. So what is Gavin Newsom's solution? Close more prisons. Nobody has to do any time. You can keep doing the crime. You won't be subject to actually spending time behind bars, because his pipeline is to get you right back out. So that's his newest release is, hey, close the jail.
So it's the same old song and dance that never works. They collect money, they spend money, they go broke. We need more. See, what was that saying I've used in the past? Wash, rinse, repeat. And I believe he was the one spearheading the reparations part of what's going on in California as well. And
he signed it into existence. It was his signature that started the California Reparations Task Force.
So I wonder if, since they're looking at it costing 2 times the California budget, and now he doesn't want it, how he's going to get out of this.
So he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. I'm sure you're shocked to hear that.
Politician.
Where he came out and said kind of a nope, we can't do 2 times an annual budget for that. So then when that came out and people were like, hey, why did you were just playing us for a fool. Oh, no. My words were taken out of context. I still firmly believe in this. How are you going to, what is that? Squeeze blood out of a...
You're going to get blood out of a turnip?
Yes. Because we don't have the money. 2, part of their task force, in order to make it happen, they are suggesting that the California Constitution be set aside, and we kind of change that pesky little you can't discriminate clause in the California Constitution. The task force needs to have that removed from the California Constitution, or else they cannot hand out money to a specific group of individuals, which is solely based on their race. So it's not just a suggestion of money, a suggestion of taking property. They want to take over property and have the say on who can buy what, when, where, and how it will be doled out. They want free housing for a specific individual, free property ownership, no taxes being paid. So now you're further reducing your tax base if 6% of your population doesn't have to pay at all, just hands down. And they want to hand out up to $1.2 million per person.
And they truly don't know who those people are. And I don't mean those people in a derogatory sense. I mean that it's been so far long gone, they're never going to figure out who's rightfully entitled to what. A handout, a hand up, because you can't wade through all this minutia and figure out who you owe.
No, in part, the ownership of slaves was illegal at California's inception, except Native American tribes owned slaves in California. That was an exception. But the slave ownership that they are talking about for the reparations task force was southern states, essentially the Confederate states, not all of them, but the Confederate states, Confederate identifying states. California not included in that. California allied itself with the North, essentially, and they were a non-slave owning state. And then there is lack of clarity on whether or not if an African American was a slave owner, is that included in the reparations group? If they were the descendant of a slave owner, including African Americans who owned slaves, would they still be included in the reparations board?
Yeah, so you know what? We need to get a hold of the family of Mr. Anthony Johnson from back in the day, because he was a slave owner. Not only did he own black slaves, he also owned white indentured slaves. So I guess we'd have to look at that bloodline as well to see if his family owes reparations.
We have such a deep history that is so intertwined with every other part of itself. I don't think we could do it. And basing it solely on the color of one's skin is not the way to do it either, because there are individuals who are darker skinned who would have been discriminated against but do not qualify based on being African or of African descent or of slave owning African descent, but they have been discriminated against because people thought they were.
Right. And like we've said a few podcasts back, Do we do it for Chinese folks too?
We should. If we're going to include it, let's include everybody. I mean, Chinese
during World War II?
It took a while for them to receive even the statement that, yes, we did bad things and, oh, we're sorry. But that didn't get people's land back. That didn't get everything they lost back.
So do we go back to let's go back to the 60s, 61, 62? Civil Rights Bill?
It was signed, well, officially went into play, I believe, 64.
Okay, so do we hold all of the Southern Democrats who filibustered for 70 days partially responsible for the delay in the bill?
And their descendants?
And their descendants? I mean, like, you and I have talked several times. Where does it end? Can't we, what's that saying, Rodney King, can't we all just get along? Can't we just say, hey, everything that's happened in our past history is bad? We'll ensure that it never happens again. And that's one of the reasons I say a lot of these statues and a lot of the things that these Dems were so bent on removing, you have to keep that history up so you can see it, so you can make sure you don't repeat it. I believe that's why there's all of the museums in Germany.
It's not because we want to support the Holocaust and say this was a good thing. Auschwitz, not Germany, but Auschwitz is there. Not because we want to say that this was a good thing. Let's remember. It's because this was such a bad thing. Let's never forget.
Let's never forget it.
And all across Germany, every museum, every war site in which we remember the bad things and we remember and keep it present. It's not for a love of war. It's not for support of what they did. It is because we do not want to forget. And we want to remember all those who were harmed by what happened.
Yes, we want to make sure that we don't repeat our past. And I believe going back just a couple slots to Durham and what our former president has said about his report that's just come out, Mr. Trump, he hopes that Comey and some Democrats pay a heavy price for this fraud. A lot of experts strongly believe now that the Justice Department, FBI, and certain Democrats have ruined those institutions for years to come.
Well, you had the text messages that were ultimately made public between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, which, sorry for their affair that came to light, and I do feel bad for their families. But what came to light is their intent on going after Trump, and that they would do so through any means necessary almost.
I think it's pretty simple to figure out why. All you got to do is go back to one of his statements. I believe it was right prior to him winning the presidency, was the fact that he said that he's going to go after the deep state. And then Chucky Schumer from New York made the statement that, oh, you better watch what you wish for because they will come after you with a vengeance.
And lo and behold.
Right. And I believe that even Schumer is part of this deep state. Yes.
It's how you remain in power, isn't it?
That's how these people keep a cycle of power and a cycle of enriching themselves. We've got 300 million minions out there, and we have 1 to 200 people that are pulling all the purse strings.
So maybe we should all just become socialist or possibly communist. That would fix it, right? Isn't that what we're told by some of our leaders, that we need to implement socialism or implement communism, depending on which leader it is?
Well, it's the perfect utopia. Like I said, if you go to school and you look at it on paper, because if you look at communism on paper and don't call it communism, it actually sounds like a bed of roses. But then you have these narcissists and sociopaths that look at the power, they get addicted to the power, and then you have 10 to 100, like I just said, that they take control over the week, and before you know it, it's the same cycle over again.
Yeah, so a former aide to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is now a senior official within the New York State Communist Party. which I found very interesting because it kind of goes from a socialist Democrat supporter to a Communist Party individual. So she has been freely stating that was still a communist, but working for AOC helped in certain other avenues, so she was completely agreeable with that. But she described communism as being equality, democracy, peace, and advancement of workers, the advancement of the oppressed, and for humanity in general. And that if the pathway to communism, which again would get you equality, democracy, peace, and the advancement of workers, etc., would be unkind. So the path to communism would be unkind to those who would block progress. So this is an individual that seems to support what Joseph Stalin did, which is starving millions of Ukrainians, and what Mao did, Mao Zedong, for the Cultural Revolution and Great Leap Forward. The death toll is estimated to have been at least 40
million.
40 million. And so you had all of these leaders who were doing these great communistic things that killed millions of people, and you have a person who says it will be unkind to get there. Do we think that China's communism has proven to be amazing, or that Joseph Stalin did amazing things for the world? Because we got there through unkind methods.
Well, and they think that they're going to be part of the top tier, the elite, that they're going to survive all this and they're going to be just fine. Kind of like Cuba. Cuba did the same thing under Fidel Castro. They thought it was going to be a great thing having him in charge as one communist, and the country's a wreck. The people were not fed well. It's a mess.
And how many former Cubans or Cuban identifying individuals ended up in Florida escaping the amazingness of communism?
I would bet probably half the country, and that's why folks say that's why people rush here and we don't leave here to go somewhere else, because it's not all roses and lollipops.
Do you know who else fled roses and lollipop communism?
Tell me.
Our Department of Homeland Security
Mayorkas?
head, Mayorkas. Yes. He was a 1-year-old baby, so he personally didn't flee. He had no choice. But he fled with his parents. They were in the United States. I believe Dad was in the United States on a student visa and was able to come here because they were moneyed people. And so they fled the communist revolution for America. Even his parents fled communism, but they were also moneyed people, so they stood to lose having communism take over. But now he is aligned with the same people that support this mindset. I find that an interesting, quick evolution there.
Evolution and turn of events. You know, an interesting turn of events that I saw was Ward 10 in Minnesota.
Oh, are you talking about the local
Democratic Party convention that descended into complete chaos? I don't pick on any race or ethnicity. That's not my job. It shouldn't be done ever. But I was actually confused at first when I saw that Ward 10 was in a state in the United States of America. I did not realize there was such a large Muslim population there now.
Yes, I believe they described it as individuals who are wearing the full, not the abaya, what is it? The hijab and the niqab, but like the full thing.
Yes.
Whatever, it's falling out of my brain at the moment, but that individuals dressed that way rushed the podium to stop the person they didn't want from speaking.
Right, and that's a local Democrat convention. I'm hoping that the state or the federal affiliate jumps in there and corrects that, because we may have a broken system in some areas, like we always talk about voter fraud and media helping us pick our presidents and big billionaires. However, that's not how the election process works in America. We don't get mad and disgruntled at somebody and then go beat the crap out of them.
I actually just recently read Representative Ilhan Omar, who is from Minnesota, but I read her book. And in it, she actually talks about how other Muslim individuals tried to strong arm her father into stopping her from running because they did not want a woman to be considered for the party or elected. They wanted male representation, and they told her and through her father that she would never have the support because she was a woman. Now, I wonder if in this case, there were some similarly situated individuals who were attempting to sway the community for or against a particular individual because they were a woman, or maybe they wanted a woman and they didn't want the man type of thing. I didn't quite catch the why behind it.
Well, I'm probably going to butcher her name, but the current city council member is Aisha Shuktai. It's AISHACHUGHTAI. She's the current council person, and she's running against Nasri Warsham. And it appears that the challengers people, not their people, her people personally, but somebody that supported that person, are the ones that started the whole fight. It was a large crowd of Chuktai supporters that took the stage in preparation for a speech. Then the uproar ensued after that. So it's nice to get into what I call confrontations with the opposing people, but not in a physical sense. So it appears that that's how we may settle things, or how we may start and end things in certain areas of the country, is, hey, I don't like what you're saying, so let's just strap it up and beat each other up.
Yeah, that's definitely not the way to do it. I don't want things done by
No, not
throwing
by physicality.
punches. Yeah.
Don't do that. Absolutely not. And if we're going to fall into those depths of how we're going to run things, and we've really lost our way with this country. So you were just talking a few minutes ago about taxes and people coming after your homes.
Yes.
Yeah, well, apparently there was a truck driver passing through Texas who now has to go to court because the state is putting all of his cash on trial, which is $40,000. And they're not wanting to ever let the person keep his money.
So I just read about that, and this is not the first case. It won't be the last case. It's civil asset forfeiture. And what they do is, if you have a large amount of cash and you're pulled over, say you're pulled over speeding, they will take your cash and you'll never get ticketed or charged with a crime. And then you have the problem of proving where every dollar came from. And if you can't, then it's their money. And it doesn't go through the same requirements that normal criminal forfeitures would go through. For instance, you have to get convicted of stealing money from a company, and then they'll go after all of the assets, the ill-gotten proceeds, that type of thing. In civil asset forfeiture, they take, and it is incumbent upon you to attempt to get it back. And they have all of the money. They're the federal government, city government, local government, and I say feds because they did this in Los Angeles. But they hold your cash, and you are very unlikely to ever get it back.
Well, according to Mr. Woods, he's trying to expand his trucking business. And that was some of his life savings that he had put together so he could buy a second truck. It's quite interesting, though, that he was pulled over by an officer who said he was tailgating another vehicle, that he had pulled up too close to it. So when does pulling up too close to somebody allow an officer to go through your vehicle?
So I don't know about this particular case that you're talking about, but something that has come up is most people don't know their rights, and they also want to prove They want to prove their innocence. And so what can happen is you get pulled over and then an officer says you were doing that. You were tailgating, maybe you rolled a stop sign even though you thought you completely came to a stop, whatever the case may be. So then they say, "Can I search your vehicle?" And they might not just directly say it, but they'll put it nicely like, "Oh, well, let's just get this over with. I'll come really quick. You'll prove that you're not the drug dealer we think you are, and we'll just quickly search your vehicle." And you're like, "Hey, I have no drugs, no problem." And you agree to allow your vehicle to be searched. And this can happen for a variety of reasons. You're scared. You don't know you have the right to say no, the right to refusal. And so then they search your vehicle, they find cash, they take it.
And this is exactly how it worked out. You just basically nailed it almost word for word. So a lot of experts say that this is legal theft. The deputy who stopped Woods wrote in court documents that Woods was acting overly nervous and uncomfortable, also displaying signs of stress, such as labored breathing during the stop. Do you think maybe he's not used to being pulled over potentially, and he was nervous like all people are when they get pulled over to get a ticket?
The vast majority of people getting pulled over, even if you have done absolutely nothing wrong, you are going to be nervous. You're going to start running through everything in your head that you could have possibly have done along the way. I would be shocked if you were completely calm. Then you'll probably get accused of being on drugs because you're too calm for getting pulled over.
Well, during the stop, he could not state to the officer exactly an amount of money he was carrying when asked. And the officer found money stored in 2 duct tape bundles. He was starting to believe that Woods was involved in criminal activity, particularly money laundering. See, they always throw that money laundering out there, and this takes me back to the Bidens of all people. They have been doing it quite successfully for years in the tune of millions. This man has $40,000 in his truck without knowing whether he's committed a crime. Like you said, you don't have to arrest. You don't have to charge. You just take the money, you give him a ticket number, and you say, okay, feel free to call this number and see if you can get your money back. So he thought that Woods was involved in criminal activity, so, like money laundering, like I said. So the deputy wrote at one point, later adding that Woods could be involved in the transport of money connected to drug trafficking. Well, don't you have to arrest, do an investigation before you assume and make a statement like that?
Not in civil asset forfeiture. It's based on a sworn affidavit that the officer will generally file. Hey, seize this cash, this is why, and they'll put it up for civil asset forfeiture.
So this has allowed them to just ask you when they pull you over, so they can pull you over even if you're not doing anything, like you said. So the Institute for Justice says Woods' case isn't unique, like you just stated, and that police in Texas, most populous county, regularly pull over and ask drivers if they have cash in their cars. The police departments get to keep whatever money its officers seize. That's 300-year-old thievery.
So they have a desire. It beefs up their police funds. And so they now have an end goal in mind, which isn't to necessarily keep the streets safe, stop drug money, stop all of these illicit activities, because in many of these cases, they don't even make a case for any illicit activity. They just take the money.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing, is at least 113 civil forfeiture petitions filed by county prosecutors since 2016 are based on a form affidavit written by officers who were not even present at the time or place of the seizure. Boy, this is a scheme of biblical proportions.
Well, and I believe the one that you're mentioning is out of Texas.
Yes.
It happens all over the United States. There was a case down in Southern California, and I believe it was the feds who they were targeting certain people that were keeping either money or goods in safety deposit boxes of a particular bank or really a company. And so what they did is they seized everything, and then they made people prove that they rightfully owned it, but then they weren't really working with them because they wanted to keep every single thing that they seized. Some people, if they really had illicit money or goods in there, they're not going to then come after the government to try and get that illicit money back. But what did they also take in the course of that? People who put their savings inside the safety deposit box. So there was a big case out of LA for that. And I know a judge did come down on, again, I believe it was the feds, because they said they were doing one thing and then they turned it into a civil asset forfeiture scheme. So unfortunately, it really encourages our government to do the wrong thing because it beefs up their accounts.
It's amazing. And I asked that question recently to you and others, and I'll ask it again. Is this the greatest country on earth?
I would like to think it is, but sometimes when I read about stuff like civil asset forfeiture or our president being involved in illicit activity, money schemes, money laundering schemes going through 20 plus different companies, and that's who we're supposed to look for. That's who we're praising. That's who we're giving an honorary doctorate to and calling an extreme intellect.
We have corruption from top to bottom. And it's hard being honest, isn't it?
It's hard to be honest because if you're honest, you're going to get your assets forfeited.
You get your assets handed to you.
Yep, or handed to the government. Okay, so something that we talked about on this show, Brittany Griner. I will say I still do not agree with the negotiation that they did to release her for an arms dealer. I don't agree with that, so I'm going to start by saying that. But apparently, she has had a little bit of a change of heart since she was released from the Russian justice system. And her change of heart after getting swapped for Victor Bout is that the national anthem hits different for her now. And if you remember before, she was just a no-go for the national anthem. Let's sit this one out. However, she said it hits different and it has a lot more meaning for her now.
Well, good for her. Hopefully she's had a change of heart. And hopefully her actions will show that. She'll start doing more for people in the country, for veterans and others. And it's not just that she's looking for some kind of new contract or endorsements or something of that nature.
Yeah, so in that case, she would have been protesting a not perfect nation, but she was protesting a semi-free nation. And she has had a realization that maybe our nation isn't quite as bad as, say, getting put into a Russian prison, but we definitely have a lot of room for improvement.
Yes, we do. So we've talked a lot about different laws for different levels of people. So I believe we talked about a case down in Tulare County of a young person that was killed by someone that ran a light or a stop sign. Does that ring a bell to you?
Yes.
Well, apparently one or both of them have been charged with a misdemeanor. Unfortunately, I did not get a chance to look up the charge and how it was handled in the court system with a specific DA, but there was a charge and it was a misdemeanor.
Interesting. So something we hear about as far as laws are loopholes. We hear from people on the left or the right that the other side is using a loophole to take advantage, and we should be closing these loopholes. Well, there's something that was just presented to me about a loophole that will let regular Americans invest alongside Silicon Valley insiders. So for 79 years, if you wanted the right to invest in early stage companies like Apple in the 1970s, or Meta in 2004, Airbnb in 2009, you actually had to be an accredited investor. And that stemmed from a 1933 law that created the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, to guard against some of the excesses on Wall Street that had led to the 1929 crash and the Great Depression. So there was a provision barring any non-founders or other company insiders from investing in the pre-IPO company unless they had either a consistent income of at least $200,000 a year or a net worth of at least $1 million. And that was supposed to be to protect financially unsophisticated people from being goaded into investing into flashy and ultimately doomed companies. But that actually stopped the regular guy from being able to invest in some of these companies that went big. And so who are the people that could invest in the companies that were going to make billions? Rich people. So I guess they're looking at trying to help this out. So the Jobs Act allows regular Americans to invest in startups without being a company insider or a millionaire. So this is to close the "you're not one of us" loophole.
Close a rich man loophole, they'll open one somewhere else.
More than likely.
Yes, cause and effect. So you do know that the gentleman in New York that tried to help out fellow passengers has been charged?
Yes, he's a Marine veteran and a current student. I think he was using his GI Bill, but I could be mistaken on that. He is a New York native, went back home after his service. And apparently he wasn't the only one to help subdue this individual, but he's the only one so far charged. There were 3 of them, if I understand correctly, who helped to stop this individual who was threatening and had previously assaulted other writers and was getting in the face of and threatening current writers. In New York, apparently you're just supposed to allow yourself to be assaulted, and maybe you're supposed to die. We're not allowed to stop people who are threatening us, at least not in New York. But yes, so now this gentleman, he's like 24 years old, this gentleman is facing charges in court.
Well, apparently there was enough pressure put on the DA there to do something. So he went ahead and arrested and charged. However, they put off a court date until I believe it's mid to late July. And now they've convened a grand jury. Now the grand jury can look at the evidence. They can look at all the audio, listen to all the audio, look at the video, call witnesses that were there, and then they can decide not to charge. And then that will relieve the DA and his assistant DAs from having to prosecute and basically making this thing go away.
I believe they've raised $2 million plus for his legal defense if it doesn't end up going that way.
Yeah, and they say that they'll use that for his defense, and if there's money left over, it will, guess what, get donated
to help people with mental health issues.
Yes, to help people with mental health issues. Apparently, the poor guy that died, and I say poor guy because nobody deserves to be choked to death unless you're, well, we'll leave that as it is. But he was so well known that he was number 1 on the list of the mental health department there in New York on a person that needed the most help. He has broken women's noses on the train. He's broken their jaws. He himself has choked people. He has threatened to murder people. So the victim, was not a victim in the traditional sense.
No.
He was a victim of the New York mental health system that did not do, like you have said many a times, is to take a person off the street, put them into a rehabilitation setting, and try to help them out. They did not do any of that. So let's see if I can go backwards a few days. So May 15th, 2023, I believe 1800 is when the federal government moved its offices from Philadelphia to D.C.
Oh, so this past week in history.
Yes.
Moved to D.C.
Moved to D.C. And it's interesting that I know that where our federal buildings are at, where the government's at, the White House, everything is tied into the Constitution.
Right, because they're supposed to have their own special laws.
Yes, it's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution says that they can have their own land, but no more than 10 miles square.
So it's outlined just how much it can be, where, not necessarily where it can be, but just how much land they are allowed.
And James Madison explained why D.C. is D.C. It's because it's not a state, because he didn't want it a state. So one state over the others did not have more power based on the structure of the government.
And aren't the certain members of Congress trying to turn D.C. into a state so they'll have appropriate representation?
Yes, they'll get there based on population. I think one senator and two congressmen or
two senators and one
congressman.
Yes,
I had that backwards.
Yeah, we have two senators for everybody. It would,
yes.
Or every state. So it would give true representation. Wouldn't the alternative be that nobody can live there?
Yes, and it's interesting that a lot of folks of color, because we've talked about reparations and slavery and a lot of things of America over the years. There was a time when young black folks, because back in the day in D.C., it was actually the largest population of blacks in America in one location. There was, I believe, 600,000 or 700,000. And once they started getting the right to vote, they moved to Maryland and to the other side of the Potomac.
Yes. So you have Virginia and you have Maryland.
And so that gave them, when voting was good for them, they were able to vote. And then all of a sudden the government changed the rules to where representation was only done by X. So then they lost that right. Then they had to fight through the Civil Rights Act and all that to get their voting rights back and all that. So it's quite interesting, the history of D.C. and why it is how it is, and how rich folks tried to correct what they felt was an issue, and that people had to struggle and fight for so many years to correct things and make it right. So people of color could vote, so women could vote. There's been a lot of interesting history here in America.
Very much so. Very much so.
I wasn't going to say his name, but the young man in New York's Daniel Penny.
Yes.
I wonder how many people actually in New York, besides him, just stand there and watch somebody just get the you-know-what beat out of them, or pushed off of trains or killed. There's been, I believe, 30-some people or more killed in New York subway systems just in the last couple of years.
I think our natural fight or flight would kick in, flee, and I think it can be to fight, to flight, or freeze. Really, it's not just flight or fight, it's also freeze. And so our natural inclination can be one of those three. So stepping in to help, I mean, if you are a smaller individual and it is a bigger individual who you'll have to fight, you're probably going to look and say, I don't think I can take that person. Not that you don't want to help the person in need, but do you want to die for it?
Right. And the reason I kind of brought you in that direction is looking at the person today that has passed away seemed to have that same self-protectionism, even though he had psychological and mental issues, because he tended to pick on older, more frail, weaker people that wouldn't be combative and put up a fight.
Or somebody that you can easily take.
Yes, so you needed someone like this young Marine that wasn't going out of his way to kill somebody. He was going out of his way to help defend weaker people on the train because he was a stronger individual and felt that he could handle the situation.
And I believe in New York, so one of the things that they have is a duty to retreat. And so we saw this in a situation that we've mentioned previously, which was a bodega worker who was being assaulted, who actually did attempt to retreat. And once they were trapped, fought back, and ultimately the other individual died. And they were charged with that murder. And they had the duty to retreat. They attempted to retreat, and they were still charged. They were from the Dominican Republic originally, I believe.
That's an interesting statement, though. The duty to retreat. You're in a subway.
Where are you going to retreat to?
You're on a track. You're underground. Where might you retreat to?
Exactly. So how do you have a duty to retreat when you have nowhere to go? But this person in the bodega, they were backed into a corner, and they still got charged even though they attempted to retreat to nowhere. It's one of those situations where you will be wrong no matter what you do. You attempt to retreat. I'm sorry, you should have allowed yourself to get assaulted. Oh, you allowed yourself to get assaulted, but you didn't get away. I'm sorry, you should have died.
That's what makes it so interesting about the difference in states, state by state. Now you go to Florida, just right down the road from them, you have what?
Stand your ground.
Stand your ground, which means don't retreat.
You don't have to retreat. You can retreat, but you don't have to. We've seen it in other areas, not just in New York or Florida, even in California. There was an individual who was trying to get homeless people to move off from his mother's property. And essentially, California, through the judges and through the court system, has said that an individual who is taking over your property, who refuses to leave, who does drugs, who harasses you, has more rights than you do of asking the person to leave. And when that person ultimately pepper sprayed the homeless person, and the homeless person took out a weapon and relentlessly beat the homeowner's son, and he was attempting to retreat from the beating, and he was trying to get away, and the homeless person continued in pursuit of someone who was no longer a threat or a perceived threat. The courts have said it was the homeowner's son's fault for trying to get the homeless person to move off. And so not only did he get beat pretty severely, he had to take even more of a beating, and the courts allowed essentially the belief or the process that you can beat to no end. There is no ending.
Do you know why leadership like that in California are more willing to let things like that take place and make these decisions? Because they hide behind big high walls with security, not only with security, but with armed security.
They get their own armed security, they get their own walls, they get their own protection, but you, the little guy, must just deal with it. And in fact, we'll be lied to our face, lied in story, lied across the country, which is the best places and the happiest places are the places with the least amount of crime, like San Francisco and New York and Detroit. We're being lied to our face to say that there is not a crime problem in these big cities, and that everything is hunky-dory, and the cops love working for these cities. They're the happiest places to work. The happiest places for cops to work are these cities. Well, if you don't report crime, if you don't take and do a police report and note that there is crime, guess what? Your city's the safest it's ever going to be.
What's that saying? Liars don't figure and figures don't lie, something like that.
Figures lie and liars figure.
Figures lie and liars figure.
Yeah, because the Washington, D.C. mayor they're considering adding cops to their crime surge, but this is coming on the heels of reports that cops are super happy across these cities and municipalities, and that there's not a crime, there's not a rise in crime, but there has been. If you count real crimes, so something that we talked about, I want to say it's been at least a year, was the app that a techie person created for the San Francisco Bay Area, which was to note where the poop was. I don't know if you recall that conversation.
I do.
But this techie person created what they called, pardon my language, but the app was called Snap CRAP. And they created it to hook up with the San Francisco City reporting, where you can report kind of like a hazardous area, which is that there's
hazardous stuffies on the ground,
human excrement on the ground. And so it was started as a joke, but then I guess someone did a report on it and it just took off. And so a bunch of people were downloading it. So it was supposed to hook up for SF, San Francisco SF 311, to hook up with the app and just to say, hey, this needs to be clean. And it was supposed to have like a ticketing system and you could follow whether or not it had been done. Now, I might be mistaken, but isn't pulling down your pants in public illegal?
Used to be. You could be arrested and charged as a
indecent
exposure type person.
Okay, so, and leaving behind human waste would also be a health hazard.
Leaving a hazard in the roadway like that should be a crime as well.
Okay, so if you're able to undress from the waist down, just because you choose not to go after somebody doing it, it's still a technical crime.
Yes.
So this is just another example of crimes that occur that don't get reported because they're not going to take a police report on somebody going to the bathroom. They've decided that that's a waste of their time. So now your stats look really good.
Yes, just like up in the Bay Area, shoplifting is a waste of their time now. That's why so many stores are closing, for the safety of their employees and for the loss of their inventory.
And we've seen many flagship stores. I believe T-Mobile has closed, and we just see all of these flagship stores closing. San Francisco's a huge market. Portland's a huge market. Los Angeles is a huge market. So if you start closing big name companies in these places, they're going to be hurt. And especially your local people that have to use the bus system. They don't have a car. They're not going to be able to go farther off. You're taking away by saying that there isn't a problem, nothing to see here. We're not going to do anything about it. And it's just a circular, we're in denial continuation.
Sorry, my mind got sidetracked looking at a quick article.
And what did it get sidetracked with?
Well, I always think about U.S. Navy, since we're both Navy veterans, and what our pay was when both of us were in, what our ratings were. And for me, it was many, many years ago. For you, not too long in the recent past. And we're having such an issue with signing people to join the military or stay in the military. You want to keep people in? Pay them what the civilian workforce gets paid.
So here in California, that would be $15.50 an hour, especially for a company of that size. It would be $15.50 an hour. But our pay scales for our military members are all over the place. And it shouldn't be. I see zero issue with paying $15 an hour, but our military members make so little, especially E1, E2, E3, they qualify for food stamps. They can qualify for other assistance. We are paying too little if you qualify as a military member for food stamps or other food benefits.
Yes, like I heard on a podcast in the not so long ago past by a former Navy SEAL talk about the pay when he was in. It was basically SHI. And the Navy now has said that sailors who sign up for a 3-year journeyman sea tour to get bonus pay. The Navy is adding new ratings eligibles for incentives under the detailing marketplace assignment policy. Always come up with fancy names. The enlisted career management tool was introduced last year to reduce manning gaps at sea. So you want to know how much they're going to be eligible for?
How much? Tell me. What's the dollar amount?
Between $200 and $800 extra dollars a month.
Oh, whoop-de-doo.
Yes.
I'm sorry. That's okay. Based on
the exact amount is contingent upon the location and type of sea duty and can be modified depending on the popularity of the duty station or other factor. But as of today, it's averaging approximately $500 a month. And there are 6 rates that are eligible for the bonus.
Ooh, what rates?
Aviation bosun's mate,
Okay.
electrician's mate, aviation structural mechanic, quartermaster, aviation ordnance, and my former rating, gunner's mate.
Well, you would have gotten an average of $2.88 an hour more based on working a normal 40-hour work week, 52 weeks a year. So we know that they're not doing that. We know it's not a 40-hour work week. So as soon as you start working more hours, your hourly pay starts to head south. But let's see, how much does an E1?
Oh, let me add something here. That was starting last month. Those additional ones are eligible. But there's also the gas turbine systems tech. And if you're a chef, culinary specialist, machinist mate, damage controlman, interior communications, and retail services specialist. So I guess that would be if you work at the Naval Exchange.
Darn, you didn't mention my rate. So
You guys already make too much.
I would have been SOL on that. I would have been out of luck.
Well, they're supposedly trying to fill gaps at sea and pave the way for senior enlisted marketplace. So what I would like to see, well, let's just pick one, okay? I'll pick an EOD, explosive ordnance disposal, because that's a highly technical job. It's very dangerous. So then we propel that out into the civilian world, an EOD person within a police department, I imagine makes 80 to 150,000 a year, dependent on the location. If you pay them a civilian equivalent, then an EOD person would be making that same amount or close to it, but it's nowhere near it.
Okay, just to give an idea, right now,
It's just the disparity of their pay is ridiculous, especially the last 20 years. You know, I was too old, per se, to go to war the last 20 years, which if it was defending the homeland, I'm all in. They're just so way underpaid.
So an E1, your E1 starter pack, less than 4 months, you're making $17.73 a month. Now go over 4 months, which most sailors getting out to their first duty station after you go through boot camp and you go to your A school, possibly your C school, you're going to start to get into the less than 2 years. So that's $19.18 a month. That's not with any of that fun bonus pay. So $19.18 a month is $23,016 a year. Now, if you assume a 40-hour work week, which we all know, no sailors working a 40-hour work week, but let's just give it to a nice 40-hour work week. They're making $11.07 an hour. And that's if you're only working 40. So as soon as you start going over that, your hourly rate goes down tremendously. Going out to sea, you're more likely to do more hours.
Oh, they work 16 to 18 hours a day. And if you're in home port, say you're a young sailor, decide to go in the Navy and you get married, I don't know if you're now eligible for BAQ and VHA to live off base with your family.
You generally are eligible, and if you're stationed somewhere where they can't be, wherever home is, they get the BAH there.
And I know when I was in, it was nice having that extra money, but it was not a lot.
It is not, and especially at the lower enlisted, you're not getting very much money.
And that's where AOC and all these young hacks that think they can fix the world need to be looking at our military and saying, okay, what can we do to enhance their lives, their livelihood, and get them through their 3, 6, 8, 10, 20-year career making what they call a livable wage?
So just for awareness, a $15 an hour person working 40 hours, that's our full-time wage, would be making approximately $2,600 a month. And you don't make $2,600 a month, or at least cross that threshold, until you are an E5. You cross the threshold at E5. with less than 2 years.
And these are all based on just your base pay, correct?
This is your base
no
pay.
Incentives, combat pay, or...
Correct. So this sea duty, this special, and it's only for certain jobs that they're having a hard time filling, this extra $200 to $800 a month, that's just for specific sailors. So if you're just regular sailor doing your normal duty out on a ship, this is what you're going to make. You won't see, again, over $2,600. E4, more than 2 years. As an E1, you'll never see it. You'll never make any more than 1918 as it currently stands. E1, who doesn't get promoted, makes no more money. 1918. And E2, same thing. Once you're at E2, less than 2 years, you make the same thing across the board, which is 2149. E3, you see a little bit of movement until you hit over 3 years, and you're at 2548. So you're almost there. So it would take an E4 with over 2 years or an E5 with less than 2 years to see minimum $15 an hour at, again, 40 hours a week. We do not pay enough.
No, we do not. And that's just one branch of the military.
So how about you increase the wages and use those encouragement dollars across the board?
Yeah, and $200 to $800 to an 18-year-old sounds like a lot of money, but it's not.
No, it is not a lot of money. So if you want to be an E1, oh, there you go. If you're an E1, 1918, and then you get the lovely $800 bonus, you're going to get up to that minimum wage. So they're basically going to pay you $15 an hour.
With follow California law and bring you up to minimum
bonuses, wage. Yeah, San Diego, if you do actually get housing rates, BAH, right now, E1 is $36.39 a month if you have dependents, $27.30 if you don't. But it's a very high cost of living area. So you're
right, and that
you're not getting a whole lot of
covers
money.
your rent. And it would behoove the military to tear down some of these junky houses and barracks they have, build new ones, and have families stay on base for free.
It would be nice. I know when I was in, they were starting to tear down some of the buildings, and they said no longer safe to inhabit. And then Hurricane Ivan struck Pensacola, Florida, and a bunch of us got stuck in Chicago. So what did they do? They just reopened the barracks and told us to go live there.
Go live with the mold.
Yep. Mold is a big problem on military bases, along with the water problems that we have.
Yes, it is.
Do you know how to spot a radical?
I make eye contact. And if they smile at me, they're radical. Because looking at me and not turning away, they have to be a radical.
In case you don't have that ability to look at somebody and know, the Biden administration has launched a new initiative to train the public on how to spot radicals, how to fight domestic terrorism. But a lot of their definitions of what a radical is a conservative. So they're going to help you spot these radical conservatives.
So if I look at myself in the mirror, I should scream because I'm looking at a radical conservative.
Apparently. You should turn yourself in.
And it's interesting that if you put a moderate to conservative side by side with a moderate to a liberal, you can tell who the radical is. You can listen to what they have to say. If they would give you access to their text, to their emails, you would know who the radical side is.
Well, if you look at the Biden administration, parents are radicals if they stand up for not wanting their kids harmed in the classroom. If you remember, they were tagged as radicals, and they created a new threat tag in the FBI to start tracking these radical parents who had the audacity to stand up at school board meetings.
And want their kids to be safe, protected, and
not
educated.
Not indoctrinated, but
Correct.
educated. Reading, writing, and math. We have abysmal numbers right now with how many students can actually read, how many students can actually do a math equation. And yet the problem is parents who don't want their kid radicalized.
And that's not conservatives, because I guarantee you the Teachers Association, that lady you see in front of Congress and on the news all the time.
Weingarten.
Yeah, she is not by any means a conservative. She is a far left radical.
Who's also trying to rewrite history, as we've noted before, where she talked about how her sole goal was to get everybody back in the classroom and schools open, even though she was doing quite the opposite.
Video and audio does not lie unless you doctor it or modify it.
So let's talk about our electric grid for a few moments, if you please.
Let's do it, Sparky.
So something that I saw was just how Norway has gone electric, and they are to be followed. And they adopted electric vehicles before the United States did, and they have been a leader, and they have seen just this amazing level of adoption of electric vehicles go. They have just, it's been really good for them. And so people are now pointing to Norway to kind of be our model. We should model ourselves after how they've done it. Well, something I wanted to note is just how big Norway is. So Norway is 149,000 square miles. 149,000 square miles. Just to give you an idea, California alone, again rounding, 164,000 square miles. So this country of Norway is being compared to the entirety of the United States when it can fit inside of California just based on square mileage. Why is that important? Well, their entire grid and system for charging and creation and the number of cars they need is so much less than what we need in the entirety of the United States that we're going to have to, as we've talked before, mine untold numbers of just these different components. The lithium, and insert every other car component there. But they're trying to compare a small country, even though it's one of the largest in Europe, it's the 62nd biggest, it still fits inside of California.
Yes, landmass-wise it does. And what's the population of California?
California has just south of 40 million. I think we're at like 39 point something.
Okay, so the total population of Norway as of January 2023 is 5.49 million. So you are correct. You cannot compare Norway with the United States of America. And I used to always say that when Obama was in office and Obamacare was coming about, that they were trying to compare our medical system with that of Europe and other countries that have this utopian medical plan, and they're comparing it with a country that has north of 300 million people to countries that had 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, 50 million. There are no comparisons. Just like you can't compare Canada with the USA.
Apples and potatoes.
Yes. Let's talk about lithium for a sec.
Ooh, let's talk about lithium.
There is a lot of young kids, unfortunately, that get cancers and other diseases and ailments and die from lithium mining. And I'm one of these guys that watches a lot of YouTube sailing type videos. And I would say total number, I watch 10 consistently that come and go. And almost every one of them is converting their catamarans over to lithium ion batteries. And I listen to every one of them talk about how great it is to go lithium, how much energy they can store on their boat, how much they can use as individuals over time to save money, on and on and on. Unfortunately, I have not heard or seen one group in that sailing community talk about at what cost. At what cost?
It's not directly happening to them or in their eyesight, so they don't have to answer at what cost. Same with the Bill Gateses, same with the Jeff Bezos. They don't have to answer the cost because they see themselves as a part of the solution. Just as Bill Gates says he doesn't have to stop doing anything that he's doing because he's contributed more to the solution. So he doesn't have to count the cost of the children.
He has purchased more carbon credits and saved more lives than you'll ever know. No, he hasn't.
And you know what would help even more? If he quit doing what he was doing.
Park the airplanes.
If he parked all of his airplanes, if he instead lived a solitary, not flying everywhere lifestyle, you still have video internet and all of that. You can still invest in all of these companies.
Is that practice what you preach?
He doesn't have to because he's so rich.
He's rich? Oh my God, I did not know that. I was just looking up Canada real quick to just pile on to the small countries versus us. Their population is only 37 million. And we're supposed to pattern our medical after them when they're the ones that flood down from Canada down to America to seek medical treatment.
Yeah, for the ones who can get in, they're happy with it. For the ones that can't get medical care, they're not too happy with it. But now Canada's encouraging assisted suicide for all ages. So that way you don't be a burden on your family, or the medical care just doesn't run untold expense.
Why were they so worried about COVID then? And masking and lockdowns? Why was Trudeau so panicked over lockdowns and wearing masks?
He just wanted control.
Yes, and that's exactly true. But he should have been perfectly content with people not wearing masks and self-checking out.
Right? I'm choosing the way I'm going to check out.
Yep.
And by the way, Albania is considered the only narco state in Europe. Did you know that?
I did not. I just learned something new.
Yeah. So that's another part of Biden and his administration is supporting narco states because the Albanian leader is on Biden's side.
Wow.
So he's got Albania, he's got Romania, he's got the Chinese, he's got Ukraine. Is there anyone he doesn't have yet?
This has been a podcast produced and edited by the Dirt Sailor Duo. Mark and Shannon are a father-daughter team who both served in the United States Navy. This production is protected by copyright laws. Until next time, anchors away.